Chicago is a city built on top of its own tragedies, and nowhere is this more evident than the Death Alley behind the Nederlander Theater. In 1903, a horrific fire claimed hundreds of lives here, and locals swear the ground has never truly cooled. Leo, a history buff and urban explorer, decided to spend a night in the alley with a thermal camera, hoping to catch a glimpse of the cold spots that supposedly haunt the brick walls. As soon as Leo stepped into the narrow alleyway, the temperature dropped by 20 degrees. The modern sounds of Chicago, the honking taxis and the distant L train, faded into a muffled hum. Suddenly, the air was filled with the overwhelming scent of burnt velvet and old kerosene, despite there being no fire in sight. His thermal camera began to glitch, showing bright human-shaped heat signatures standing perfectly still against the frozen brick. Leo moved toward the Chicago River, near the Clark Street Bridge, where the SS Eastland famously capsized in 1915. He saw a woman standing by the railing wearing a gray, waterlogged dress from the early 1900s. Her skin looked like wet paper, and as she turned toward him, he realized she had no eyes. Only two dark, swirling whirlpools where her gaze should be. The woman didn't speak, but the water in the river began to churn violently. From the depths, the sound of hundreds of people gasping for air echoed off the surrounding skyscrapers. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical force that rattled Leo's teeth. He looked down and saw thousands of pale, translucent hands reaching out from the murky green water, trying to pull the bridge into the depths. He ran back toward the city streets, but the sidewalk seemed to stretch forever. In the windows of an abandoned storefront, he saw the reflections of children dressed in Sunday best, but their faces were nothing but white static. They were playing with a ball made of dark shadows, and every time the ball hit the ground, the sound of a heavy iron bell tolled throughout the loop. A man in a dusty, 19th century suit approached Leo, holding a blueprint of the city. He whispered that the Great Fire of 1871 never actually ended. It just moved underground. He showed Leo the map, where the streets of Chicago were drawn in a way that looked like a giant ribcage. "The city needs to breathe," the man hissed, his breath smelling of ash and Lake Michigan salt. Leo noticed the bricks on the buildings around him were shifting. They were pulsating like a lung, expanding and contracting with a wet, thudding sound. A dark, oily substance began to leak from the mortar, forming words on the ground. "You are the latest brick." He realized the city wasn't made of stone. It was made of the collective memory of its victims. A phantom L train roared overhead on the elevated tracks, but it was silent and transparent. The passengers inside were staring out with hollow expressions, their bodies flickering like old film. One passenger, a man who looked exactly like Leo, pressed a bloody palm against the glass and mouthed the words, "Get out while you still have a name." A thick, sulfurous fog rolled in from the lake, identical to the fog described in the historical accounts of the city's worst disasters. Inside the fog, Leo saw the outlines of the SS Eastland rising from the pavement of Wacker Drive. The ghostly ship was silent, its hull dripping with spectral mud, and the screams of the trapped passengers began to vibrate through the soles of his shoes. Leo felt his lungs filling with water, even though he was standing on dry land. He was experiencing a sympathetic drowning, a phenomenon reported by people who spend too much time near the site of the disaster. Every breath he took felt like he was inhaling the cold, dark depths of Lake Michigan, and his skin began to turn a sickly, bruised blue. He fled back to Death Alley, thinking it was his only exit, but the walls had closed in. The alley was now only 3 feet wide, and the bricks were covered in a layer of cold, damp hair. The cold spots on his thermal camera were now bright red, surrounding him in a circle. The spirits of the fire victims were reaching out, their touch feeling like dry ice against his skin. The man in the suit reappeared, handing Leo a fountain pen. "Sign the ledger," he commanded. Leo looked at the book and saw thousands of signatures of people who had disappeared in Chicago over the last century. Each name was written in a dark, shimmering ink that looked suspiciously like the oily water from the river. The clock on a nearby building began to spin backward at a blurred speed. The modern glass buildings around Leo started to dissolve, replaced by the wooden structures of the 1800s. He was being pulled back in time, into the heart of the Great Fire. He could feel the heat on his face and hear the roar of the flames, even as the spectral water of the river rose to his waist. Leo looked into a puddle of rainwater and saw that he was no longer wearing his modern clothes. He was wearing a scorched wool coat and a newsboy cap. His camera had turned into a heavy, wooden box camera from the 1900s. He had become a permanent resident of the city's past, a ghost destined to haunt the very alley he had come to investigate. The next morning, a group of tourists found a high-tech thermal camera lying in Death Alley. It was perfectly fine, but when they turned it on, the memory card was empty except for a single photo, a grainy, black and white image of a man who looked like Leo, standing in a crowd of people from 1915, waving goodbye from the deck of a ship that wasn't there.